Starting a vegetable garden in August can be challenging, but in southern climates, it's time to start fall plantings. Crop selection will vary based on your location and average first frost date, and starting seeds indoors may be necessary for some varieties. In my Austin, Texas garden, just minutes from downtown, I have a mix of established spring plantings, new crops either directly seeded or started in trays outside, and I've got a lot growing in containers too. So in this video, I'm going to show you what's growing, what I'm cultivating next, and how I approach the fall season in my Central Texas garden. I'm Scott from New Garden Road, always out here to inform, inspire, and elevate you. Encouraging biodiversity and restoring habitat is my mission, one garden at a time. Planting seeds directly in the garden or in containers is one of the most fun things for me to do. But during the hottest time of year, it can be tricky. Tender seedlings are like a magnet for ground-dwelling insects. And I can't blame them because I need some watermelon every day right about now. But with some dedication and patience, you can pull this off. I like to employ diatomaceous earth in my practice, and I will dust that on the seedlings just as they begin to emerge from the soil. And this acts as a pretty good deterrent from some of those ground-dwelling insects, which can be roly-polies, earwigs, even some grasshoppers, snails in there. But I've had some pretty good luck so far. I've got some beans established, both some snap beans. I'm growing the Grandma Nellie's mushroom bean. This is a yellow snap bean, and I grew this last year. I thought it was really unique and distinctive, so I wanted to grow it out again and hopefully save some seeds this year. And the other beans that I'm growing are some long beans, the Chinese red noodle. These are really beautiful. I love their flavor, and they can take the heat just like southern peas. If you're familiar with black-eyed peas, those will do really well through the summer. If you get them a little water, then they will continue to produce. And along with okra, long beans, or asparagus beans as they're also called, have been one of the consistent things that I'm harvesting every morning. I grew a really nice round of cucumber melons this spring, and I wanted to grow some more for the fall. So I've got several varieties. These are really unique, and these are not the cucamelons, which is little tiny, little watermelon looking things that honestly, you can take it or leave it. I don't think that they're that fantastic, but the cucumber melons are a completely different thing. A lot of folks have grown the Armenian cucumber, and that's a cucumber melon. So if you like those and you've had them be really productive like a lot of folks have, then you should try some of these other varieties. I've gotten all my seeds from Jay over at Cucumber Shop. A lot of quality goes into this. This is a small family business. I've got those growing, and I'm going to experiment with some different trellising methods. I think for the Mandarin, which I grew in the spring, I'm going to let it kind of bush out almost like a traditional melon, but the others I'm planning to do a flat panel upright trellis for them to grow on. They have somewhat of a unique growing habit apart from your standard cucumber, but they will climb, and you just got to try them. They're so sweet and crisp, and they taste like cucumbers. I've also got another round of summer squash growing. I wanted to grow the patty pan squash. I've got the golden scallop and the Benning's green tint going. I've got these covered with insect netting because I don't want the squash vine borer to get in there. I did see one flying around right before I put that cover over, so if you get some squash started, put a cover over them from the get-go. You don't want to give that bug a chance to get in there whatsoever. But squash is a great crop to grow into the fall, and many varieties will produce in as little as 50 to 60 days. And I've got quite a lot of volunteer summer greens growing, such as the edible leaf amaranth, the callaloo, and malokia, which is also known as Egyptian spinach. These are really tender, delicious superfoods. I like to pluck them early in the morning, and I'll either give them a quick saute or add them to a sandwich. It's going to really elevate the nutrition that you get out of your garden. They have reseeded and sprouted themselves, so once you begin to ID what that little sprout looks like, you can selectively thin them and interplant them or intergrow them with your other crops. And the other thing that I've got going on is a fall crop of potatoes. I like to cultivate these in grow bags because they get better air circulation. Plus, I like to try several different varieties, and it just is proven to be a fun thing to do. Now, I took all of these seed potatoes from my spring crop, and I saved some and I replanted. So that's how I'm able to get them going. They can be difficult to find this time of year in nurseries. You can use organic potatoes from the nursery, but I think, next spring, start looking for some really cool certified seed potato varieties and get those going. You can have this cycle in your garden. I also have a lot of crops that I've started in trays outside. Now you can't do this for every single variety. Specifically, if you want to look at some of those cooler season crops like broccoli, kale, collard greens, maybe some cauliflower, you're going to want to start those inside. And typically for a fall crop, we need to do that starting in late July, early August. Otherwise, you can check out one of our great local nurseries, which will have those in stock coming up in the next 4 to 6 weeks, sometime in the month of September. But I think this is a great way to plant our warm season crops continually, succession plant, grow more food. And I like to do a little bit of both because, like I said, sometimes it's challenging. You get ground dwelling insects or birds, maybe even some possums getting in your beds, messing things up. But you can plant some of those same crops in seed trays, give yourself a little bit of backup, and maybe you just have to wait for some space to clear up in your garden, or you need to prepare the soil, but it's time to plant those seeds. So you go ahead and get them going, and then you can transplant them out typically in about 4 weeks. And with this method, we don't have to harden them off, which is a transitional period to acclimate them outdoors because they're already outdoors. I have a unique system that I employ for this, and I call it my seed starting pallet table. It's just that. It's a pallet set on some blocks, and I've also got some PVC hoops over it. This allows me to put some shade cloth on top to protect those tender seedlings. And you might say, hey, I thought they were going to be outside acclimated to the weather. Well, yes, but also these tender crops do need a little bit of protection as they start to come out. And that's exactly what I do. I will bottom water them, soak them in some water for about an hour or two every morning. And this really helps with quick germination. A lot of these seeds are going to pop up in a few days, maybe a little bit more for some varieties. But I've been able to grow a lot of flowers, beans, and corn this way. I've got some sunflowers, some cosmos, a lot of zinnias that I've started. And the corn, it's really easy to get this going in seed trays. They'll pop right up and start growing rapidly. And this has enabled me to have some fallback because I like to direct seed that corn. It will take off rapidly, but just in case one of those doesn't pull up, then I've got something to go to and I can grow as much corn as possible because I love to do that. Squash is one of the more sensitive crops to transition from a seed tray or transplant in general because the roots don't like to be disturbed. But if you have that control in your backyard, you give them enough time to develop a first set of leaves before they get much of a root system. And as soon as you think they're ready to pop into your garden, you can get them in there and get them growing. This is a really great way, again, to just hedge your bets. Beans are another one that are often referred to as being sensitive to transplant, but I found that they do so really well. I had a limited number of long bean seeds that I wanted to start, and I was afraid if I put them all in the bed, then something could happen and I might lose out. So I've been really successful to get those growing in my seed trays. I just transplanted them in the bed and they're looking great. I got some of the Chinese red noodle and the Grandma Nellies, which was perfect because I had a few that didn't come up and I had the seed tray there to pull from and we're off to the races. Yeah, so this pallet system I think is something that you could adapt. You could probably do more of a planting table, something like that, but you need to have it in proximity to your house, your garden, so that you can check on it regularly. You need to have some environmental controls over it, make sure you've got enough moisture for those plants, and some shade covering. I think that's really important in a hot climate. So I've been talking a lot about warm season crops that I've grown all through the summer, but I know some of you are probably really excited about changing seasons. And it's important to touch on this because through the months of September and October, we really have a great opportunity to get some new plants in for a fall harvest. You want to think about that in terms of 60 to 80 days and be expecting when your crops are going to be ready, because I think this is very important. But in that time frame is when you want to target plantings of the brassicas, things like broccoli, kale, collards, cauliflower, kohlrabi, cabbage. But I like to direct seed this time of year too, and you can go in with things like the Asian greens. There are quite a wide array of them to choose from: bok choy, pak choy, tatsoi, all that and more. Komatsuna, purple, different textures, and these grow pretty quickly in my experience. We're talking about 40 to 50 days. So That's a really great one to get in there, along with mustard greens, which are going to be really similar in flavor to the Asian greens. And be thinking about root crops, carrots, beets, turnips, radishes. Those are all really great to start during those months. Lettuce and spinach are coming up for us. We really need the temperatures to cool down, specifically the soil temperatures. If you were directly seeding these in the garden, you may have some trouble with that while the temperatures are still really warm, but you could look at starting seeds indoors for some of those and get them in probably more in the range of October. We're going to be pretty spicy through the next couple of months, but it's time to start thinking about that. How are you going to get these in with some heat? Will you have some season extension, some shade cloth? I always recommend seaweed and succession planting, because we will get a break. Things are starting to change little by little. That average daytime high is starting to come down, so theoretically we should be getting cooler soon. I don't know. Do you feel it? I'm sweating. So there are quite a few crops that have held over from spring planting here in the garden, and I want to highlight a few of those for you. Sesame. Now, if you have never contemplated growing or have grown sesame, this has been one of the most beautiful, exciting plants in my garden. This is the first time I've ever grown it. This is a brown seeded sesame. You can make flour and oil from it, which I have no experience with. But the plants, they're so fun and they're beautiful. These white flowers, the seed pods, which are growing vertically, is just getting taller and taller. I've been seeing some really cool bees on the flowers. I'm getting some of the pods to start to dry low on the plant, and I've been taking those off and drying them some more after that. And I always grow some southern peas through the summer. Right now I've got the big red ripper, the Florida conch, which is a white one. That's a really delicious one, super creamy. And I just pulled my blue goose, which was a new variety. But these, I like to let them dry on the plant. I'll pick the pods as they start to dry, and I'll dry them further for curing. And this allows me to really kind of amass more of those peas as I go throughout the season. And I also like to save some of those seeds for replanting and sharing with others. Another really cool crop that I'm growing, probably for the third time, is the cuckoozy. This is an edible gourd. It's growing up a big trellis, and I'm kind of worried about this trellis falling over, honestly, but it's doing okay so far. These fruits are really unique. They are squash-like. They can be used as a zucchini replacement. They aren't susceptible to damage from the squash vine borer. I don't find squash bugs on them. I do find some other small sap-sucking insects which have caused a little bit of minor cosmetic damage to the fruit, but all in all, this is a really strong grower. I planted this in the spring, and it's just kind of cycled through the trellis up and down, and it's continuing to flower. So I'm hoping that when we get a break in the temperatures, I'll get some nice fruit set. And I've thrown a couple of these on the grill, really tasty. I mentioned long beans, and I want to point to the planting along the side of my house, which did really well early on in the season. But now I think with that reflective heat coming off of my house, those vines have started to get kind of fried. However, they haven't stopped growing and setting beans, so that is amazing. I'm giving them some water, of course, and I'm hoping that they will come back as we get into the fall season. But this newer planting of the Chinese red noodle is in a different location in the garden under my big shade structure, so I hope that they will be a little bit happier there. I've also got some sweet potatoes growing, and these will grow into September. I'll probably harvest sometime next month. I gotta say that I initially planted some Georgia Jets from slips of the Natural Gardener, and we had caterpillars like you wouldn't believe this spring. Took out most of those plants, so I ended up replanting from some slips that I sprouted here at home. So I have a mix of different sweet potatoes growing in there. Probably 3 or 4 varieties, honestly. But I'm looking forward to them coming through, and they can be cured and stored and taken through the winter. And these are another one that you can hold some back, and in the spring you can sprout them and plant your next crop from. I've also got a lot of okra growing, and I would have planted more for a fall harvest, but the ones that I've got have just kept on producing. I'm growing a few varieties, and you should know that there are a lot of different okra varieties to choose from. I've got the Puerto Rico Everblush, the Beck's Big Buck, which is a snapping okra. You can snap it right off the plant many times. And the classic Burgundy, which is a beautiful red okra. I've got another red variety called Bowling Red, and that one is just as beautiful. I've been harvesting probably 8 or 10 every morning, eating on these fresh. I like to throw them on the grill. They're just a really wonderful summertime fruit. And the leaves of okra are edible, so you can saute those. You can take some of the young tender ones and eat them. They're really good. They can go from seed to harvest in as little as 50 to 60 days, so you may have time to get some of those in, but they love hot weather. So you should try them in your summer garden if you haven't yet. And I'm growing jicama for the second season. I've got a nice flat panel trellis that this is growing up. It takes easily 6 to 8 months before this is ready to harvest. And one thing that I've been noticing this season, although I really love the flowers, they're beautiful, they will set beans, and that can take some of the energy away from developing the root. So I've been proactively removing the beans. You get one jicama at the base of the plant, so you don't want anything interfering with that process. I was determined to do better with growing zinnias this season. I love growing the giant colorful zinnias, and I've done just that. I've got 3 beds that have come together nicely. The giant coral, I've got a mix of the giant purple, orange, yellow, and in the mix I've got cosmos and a celosia that's called raspberry parfait, I believe. I love that one. They attract all kind of butterflies, beautiful pollinators, and these are great cut flowers too. The zinnias in particular, with some of that celosia in a small vase, have just been really bringing some garden into my home. Growing flowers is really beneficial to my health and wellness, but it also brings in biodiversity in the garden, which is something I'm really keen on. And I will always grow these. You know, you gotta love those giant zinnias. And I've been enjoying a lot of fresh herbs. Basil is one that's seasonal here, and I've got several varieties of that growing. It's wonderful to be able to come out into the garden and snip a little bit just when you need it. I think I'm to the point now where I need to consider making some pesto, and this is great because I've got some garlic that I grew last winter, so I can make some garlicky basil pesto all from the garden. But with that, I've got some perennial herbs such as the oregano, thyme, sage. Those are all really nice, and if you give them a pruning from time to time going through the summer, you'll stimulate new growth. And this is something that can really do a lot, because if you've got just a little bit coming out of the garden and you throw some of these herbs on there, that's just going to light things up for you. I love gardening in containers because it gives me the flexibility to try out some things, experiment, and I like the lush foliage that you can get from some of the tropical plants that might not survive over the winter if planted in ground. Although a lot of the selections that I have are pretty root hardy down into the teens, but things like the elephant ear, lots of ferns, and I've got a Japanese Aurelia that I'm really keen on, some tree philodendron. These make for a really lush and great environment under my pecan tree, which has a lot of shade. In addition to those tropical selections, I've got a big collection of citrus trees. Maybe you've seen some of my content on citrus. Easily my favorite thing to grow in the garden, but I have 24 citrus trees, 23 of which are in containers, and they are doing great this year. I've been feeding them consistently, making sure they are having just the right amount of sunlight, not getting any scald on them. They're under the shade cloth. Really happy. I've got 3 container grown fig trees too. These are super fun to experiment with. They're new to me. I've only in my second season growing figs in containers, but it's actually 4 varieties because one of the trees is grafted with 2 varieties on it. And I've gotten some fruit off of one of them, but they're still pretty young. I'm allowing them to mature. I'm nurturing them, making sure they're getting water every day, and also keeping them from getting too much sun because they need more of a dappled light or morning sun. But growing them in containers gives me a lot of flexibility. Also, I need to protect them over the winter because, like the citrus, they are not truly cold hardy, but so much fun to grow and delicious. I also like to experiment with growing peppers in containers because many times you can bring these through multiple seasons. So I've got an ají cristal that's in its 4th season, and it's produced pretty nicely this season. Very spicy, beautiful color. In addition to those, I've got some shishito peppers, which if you don't grow shishito peppers, you know, what are you doing? These are just non-stop. You know, fresh peppers, delicious on the grill, very simply seasoned. You don't have to do much, and you're gonna feel like a champ. Plus, you can grow them in a container. So if you've got a sunny spot, regardless of how big your garden is, or if you're in an apartment or a condo, somewhere you can't really go in ground, container gardening is a great option, and you can experiment with a lot of different things, such as herbs. I like to grow mint. mint varieties. It's kind of ridiculous how many mint varieties are out there. So I like to keep those outside in a morning sun location, afternoon shade, and I can harvest a little bit whenever I need it. What a crazy idea. Getting sweaty already. Now check out more awesome gardening videos on my channel, like this video, and follow New Garden Road for weekly content. You can grow your own food. Keep it organic.